So President Biden is holding tough on Republican demands regarding the debt ceiling. And to that I say, keep it up. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So tick, 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 we are getting closer by the day to when the United States will run out of the ability to pay its bills. And believe me when I tell you that Republicans are feeling the pressure. President Biden, though, for his part, is hanging tough, and I say keep at it. I mean, I'm particularly outraged over this whole debt ceiling issue, considering the fact that the Democrats, when the Republicans were in charge in Washington, voted along with them to increase the debt ceiling 3 times. And oh boy, did the Republicans take advantage of that to take on debt. I mean, between Donald Trump's tax cuts for the very wealthy and his spending like a drunken sailor, the Republicans ran up almost 25% of all of our national debt just during the 4 years of the Trump administration. And in fact, the deficit has been going down, generally speaking, under the Biden administration. So you have to take these claims by the Republicans about being so concerned about fiscal conservatism with a grain of salt. Unfortunately, this is more than just a petty political issue. I mean, the possibility that we could have a debt default would throw not just our economy, but the entire world's economy into chaos. I mean, the entire world relies upon the dollar. It is basically the world's reserve currency, and American government debt is held around the world. Treasuries are generally treated as cash equivalents because of the fact that there has never been a question that the United States government is going to pay its debts. In fact, the requirement that the United States government pay its debts is enshrined in the Constitution. But let's not let the Constitution get in the way of the behavior of Republicans. That's why I give the Biden administration credit for making it clear what are some of the potential ramifications if Republicans continue to demand cuts in exchange for increasing the debt limit. I mean, Republicans say they want to cut federal funding by $130 billion. But they say they're not going to cut Social Security, they're not going to cut Medicare, they're not going to cut defense spending, they're not going to cut veteran spending. And when you take out all those things and just the regular interest payments the government has to make anyway, to achieve the savings that they want, they'd have to cut 85% of everything else. That 85% includes such things as the Federal Aviation Administration, which makes sure that our air travel is safe. How about healthcare efforts, things that are attempting to address the fentanyl crisis, or the border, or law enforcement within the United States. All those are things that would be on the chopping block and would have to be on the chopping block if the Republicans are going to accomplish what they say they want to accomplish. And the Biden administration is pointing them out, to which I give them full credit. You can see that the Republicans are freaking out about this because, of course, Kevin McCarthy, the speaker, sent President Biden a letter demanding to meet with him. But yet, the Republicans have nothing to negotiate because they haven't even offered a budget. President Biden, to give him credit, he actually did propose a budget, and it included such popular things as increases in taxes on the wealthy, something that's a non-starter with those Republicans who love to give tax cuts to the rich. There's an old saying that I learned when I used to work in politics, and it's that you never want to negotiate against yourself. And that's what Kevin McCarthy's trying to do. He's trying to get the Biden administration to negotiate against itself. They've put forth a proposal that economists have said is realistic and based on realistic assumptions, and would actually reduce the deficit while funding important programs that we care about and that are popular across the United States. Things, for example, like the dependent child tax credit. But Republicans don't want to come up with a counter-proposal because of the fact that then they need to put their ideas on paper. And every time they do that, it becomes clear that what they want is not popular. I mean, that happened when Rick Scott, at the time the head of the Republican Senate Campaign Committee, put forth a proposal that made it clear that he was going to go after Social Security. That became an albatross on the back of Republicans, and they've now backed away from that. So that's why they're afraid to put anything on paper. But President Biden is right. If you're going to make a proposal, put a proposal on paper, and we'll respond to it. Why is Kevin McCarthy so afraid to do that? Well, the reason is simple, is that when you ask people in general terms, do you think that government spending should be cut? Everybody's in favor of it. According to that AP NRC poll that I've referred to in other videos, 60% of Americans say that the federal government is spending too much. However, when you ask about specifics, suddenly those numbers change. As it turns out, 72% of Americans say that education should be increased. Only 9% of Americans say that education spending should be cut. Veterans benefits, people favor increasing that by a 72-4 margin. Infrastructure is almost as popular, with 62% saying they're in favor of spending more on that, and only 7% saying they want to cut that. Medicare, you see 55-8. Environmental protection, 55-14. Healthcare, 53-17. Scientific research, 52-14, etc., etc., etc. In fact, of all the issues they talked about, not a single one has a majority in favor of cutting it. The one that receives the least support is assistance to the unemployed, where 31% said it should be increased, but 43% said it should be kept about the same. So they don't want to cut. Only 23% said that they want that cut. In fact, the only issue where more than a quarter of people said they favored cutting it was assistance to needy in the world. And I would submit that that's another example of where these general statements can generate support, whereas the specifics might not. For example, if the question were phrased specifically, do you favor increasing spending, keeping the same, or cutting spending in funding to Ukraine? My guess is you'd find a lot more support for increasing or keeping spending the same to Ukraine. You could say the same for Israel, who, despite having a black eye lately, still has strong support among Americans. So the point is that when you actually ask people about the specific policies, suddenly they don't want to cut things. And that's the conundrum that Kevin McCarthy finds himself in. It reminds me of a story I once heard back when I was a staffer for a state senator back in the late 80s. One of the other state senators had put out a questionnaire to their constituents asking, do you favor cutting government spending? Well, of course, large majorities, oh yeah, let's cut government spending. Then it asked about all the different things. Well, which do you favor cutting? And people were outraged by it, saying, wait a minute, you don't have on this list waste. But there's an old saying that one person's critical federal funding is another person's waste. So if we're going to be consistent here about it, just saying, hey, across the board cuts, that isn't going to cut it. No pun intended. Because when you're saying that, you're essentially saying we want to cut all kinds of things that people actually strongly support. Well, if you want to see another video about how the Democrats are winning the debt ceiling fight and how we shouldn't back down from our strong stand on this, check out this video over here. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.